Welcome back to the One Chart at a Time video series. I'm your host, John Schwabish. We are now getting into graphs that are used to show correlations or relationships or associations. And one of the basic techniques that people use to visualize these relationships is to use a scatter plot, where you have a horizontal axis and a vertical axis, and the dots are placed inside that XY space to show specific relationships between two or more data series. And so to help us understand how to read and use a scatter plot, we have Brittany Fong from Fong Data.
Hey, John. Thanks for having me. In a data set with multiple measurements or variables, it might be useful to compare the relationships between them. Is there a pattern? Are they correlated? And if so, by how much? To analyze these relationships, you can create a scatter plot. On a scatter plot, you will set up a coordinate system where one measurement is on the x-axis and the other is on the y-axis. The data points are then plotted on the coordinates. At this point, you could add a trend line to see if there is a correlation between the two measurements. An ideal trend line will be as close as possible to as many data points as possible and will have the same number of data points above and below the line. There are a lot of references out there, but this is one image that you can reference to determine the correlation between the two measurements. Sometimes it can be hard for readers to correctly interpret scatter plots. A good aid is to use reference lines or annotations to help describe the data or patterns being shown. One of my favorite examples of a scatter plot is this oldie but goodie from the New York Times analyzing median weekly earnings of men versus women. In the scatter plot, men's median weekly earnings are on the x-axis and women's are on the y-axis. As a way to help explain the graph, the diagonal reference lines were added to show varying degrees of the wage gap. By looking at the data points, you can see how many occupations fell into each section, and by looking at the graph as a whole, it's easy to see that almost every occupation falls below the equal wage reference line. Scatterplots are a really great way of showing relationships and analyzing patterns between two measures. Thanks for having me.
Brittany, thanks so much for that review of the scatter plot. It's a fairly common graph type, especially within the data visualization community, but that doesn't mean that everybody knows how to read it and everybody doesn't know how to create it. So I hope you now are armed to be able to create and read a scatter plot. So until tomorrow, this has been the One Chart at a Time video series. I'll see you then.